Pay the rent or get out. Those words cut deeper than any knife, not because of the demand itself, but because they came from the very lips that once called me family. It wasn't just about money. It was about being dismissed, discarded, and reduced to nothing more than a burden in the home I had built with my own hands. That kind of betrayal doesn't just sting for a moment. It carves a wound that never truly heals, a wound that forces you to confront the painful truth about love, loyalty, and the price of silence. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I have lived long enough to know that houses can hold secrets just as easily as people do. Mine certainly did. When my wife Elaine passed away 10 years ago, I was left with the silence of a home that no longer echoed with her laughter. It was then that my son David and his wife Melissa persuaded me to move in with them. They said it would be easier for everyone, that I wouldn't have to face the holidays alone. What they didn't know, and what I kept carefully hidden, was that the house we lived in belonged to me, not to them. I had bought it years earlier after receiving an inheritance from my uncle, and I had never told a soul. Life in Portland has a rhythm, especially in winter. The mornings are damp, the air heavy with mist, and by 6 o'clock, I'm always awake. Old habits never die. I shuffle into the kitchen before anyone else, brew a pot of black coffee, and sit at the small table. Melissa has filled the space with her taste, bright modern paintings clashing against the solid oak beams I once installed with my own hands. Those beams were the bones of the house, strong and patient, like Elaine once said about me. Now they stand unnoticed, covered in garish color and shallow cheer. David leaves early each morning, suited up for his corporate real estate job. He is ambitious, always talking about closing deals and chasing promotions. Melissa lingers at home longer, often reminding me how expensive it is to keep a place like this running. She points out the electric bill, the water usage, even how often I turn on the heater in my room. Each time she adds with a thin smile, "You're lucky we don't charge you real rent in Portland's market." I nod and say nothing. Outwardly, I play the role of an old man grateful for their charity. Inwardly, I know every cent that leaves my bank account still ends up in mine again, just disguised. The back bedroom is where I stay. It is drafty in winter and stuffy in summer, but it holds my few belongings: a worn armchair, a box of woodworking tools, and a framed photograph of Elaine. I find myself staring at her picture often, especially now in December when the house hums with Melissa's holiday plans. She loves extravagance, sparkling ornaments on every surface, plastic pine garlands stretching across the banister, lights strung in perfectly straight lines outside. It all feels like theater to me, a performance designed for neighbors and social media. Christmas used to mean something different. Elaine loved the smell of pine needles, real ones, and the warmth of a fire crackling as we drank cocoa with the children. She'd play carols on vinyl until we knew every lyric by heart. Back then, our dinners weren't about presentation, but about family. We ate slowly, told stories, and laughed so hard the windows steamed over. Those memories are ghosts now, haunting me in a house that feels colder no matter how much tinsel Melissa drapes on the mantel. I remind myself each day that I endure this arrangement to stay near family. I tell myself that it is better than an empty house, better than silence. But the truth is, the silence lives here too, tucked beneath Melissa's sharp remarks and David's distracted nods. My presence is tolerated, not cherished. I contribute money every month as they expect, though I silently know the truth of where it really goes. They believe they own this house. I let them believe it, perhaps because I fear what would happen if they knew otherwise. Still, something feels different this year. The air is heavier, the edges of conversations sharper. I sense that a storm is coming, one that will not be softened by the glow of Christmas lights or the smell of sugar cookies baking in the oven. I do not know what form it will take, but deep inside I feel that this holiday will not pass quietly. The walls of this house, the very ones I paid for in silence, seemed to whisper of confrontation, of truths waiting to burst free. And though I have spent years mastering the art of patience, I know even oak beams can crack under enough pressure. As I sip my coffee and listen to the muffled hum of the city waking outside, I brace myself. Christmas is near, and with it, a reckoning I can no longer delay. If you're still watching and feeling the sting of betrayal that started it all, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's move into Chapter 2, where the cracks begin to show even deeper. December in Portland always carries a heaviness in the air. The streets stay wet with rain, and gray clouds hang low enough to feel like they're pressing down on the rooftops. Inside our house, Melissa strung lights along the porch and filled the living room with garlands, but the cheer felt thin, stretched over something brittle. I could feel the strain long before anyone spoke it aloud. Melissa had been restless that week. She clicked through spreadsheets late into the night, muttering numbers under her breath, as though the digits themselves were enemies. I often woke before dawn to find her still at the dining table, her laptop glowing in the dark, a pencil tucked sharply behind her ear. Utilities, groceries, the mortgage, and then your father's share, she whispered once, not realizing I stood quietly at the hallway's edge. My name in her list sounded less like family and more like a bill to be collected. David was no better. He came home later every evening, his shoulders heavy with defeat. He loosened his tie before even saying hello, sank into the couch, and stared blankly at his phone. At dinner, when Melissa began her usual complaints about rising expenses, he offered only nods, as though he didn't have the energy to argue. I watched the distance between them grow wider with every passing day, but I knew well enough that when people are under financial pressure, they look for someone to blame. In this house, I was the easy target. One morning, I woke earlier than usual and overheard their voices in the kitchen. Melissa's tone cut through the stillness. "We can't keep floating him like this, David. Your father needs to contribute more. He's draining us. Utilities are through the roof, and we're the ones carrying it." David's reply came softer, hesitant. "It's Christmas. Do you really want to start a fight with him now? Maybe after the holidays?" Melissa's voice rose tight and controlled. "Then when?" "January? There's always an excuse. We're not running a charity. He either pays more or he finds another place to live." I froze in the hallway, my breath caught in my chest. It wasn't the first time I'd felt unwelcome, but it was the first time I heard the words spoken outright. Pay more or get out. I slipped quietly back to my room before they noticed me, but the words echoed in my mind like nails against wood. At dinner that weekend, they invited neighbors from down the block. Melissa smiled brightly, pouring wine and serving her elaborate roasted chicken, but her tongue was sharp even in jest. "It's tough supporting everyone under one roof these days," she said with a laugh, her eyes sliding toward me. The neighbors chuckled politely, but I could feel their gaze, their subtle curiosity. I had become part of her performance, the burden she could parade in front of others while she played the gracious hostess. David tried to deflect, filling my glass and shifting the conversation to football, but the damage was done. I felt smaller in my own chair, like a guest tolerated only because custom required it. The next morning, I spotted something peculiar, a glossy real estate brochure half hidden under David's briefcase. Sleek photographs of luxury condos downtown, the kind marketed with slogans like "modern living for successful families." My son already had a perfectly good house. Why would he be looking elsewhere? The thought unsettled me. Perhaps Melissa's dissatisfaction had spread beyond me, or perhaps this was her plan all along. Pressure me out, then upgrade their lives with the money they believed I didn't have. The following days confirmed my suspicion. Melissa scolded me for leaving the hall light on too long, for spending more than 10 minutes in the shower, for sitting in the living room when she wanted quiet. Each comment alone was trivial, but together they wove a message. My stay here was conditional, my welcome fragile. That night, I sat in my room staring at Elaine's photograph. I remembered her voice, calm and steady. "Richard, patience is strength. Let people show you who they are." She had been gone a decade, but her wisdom lingered like a compass in my chest. I could reveal the truth at any moment. The deed in my name, the bank account untouched, The fact that I wasn't the helpless man Melissa imagined. But I held back. Not yet. For the first time, though, I wondered if Christmas itself would force the issue. The decorations glowed, the carols played on the radio, yet the house was filled with tension so thick it nearly hummed. Something was coming. I could feel it like a storm cloud rolling over the horizon, inevitable and dark. If you're still watching and can sense how small signs can grow into life-changing conflicts, drop number 2 in the comments. Let's step into chapter 3, where the first big storm finally arrives. The day had begun like so many others in Portland. Gray skies, damp sidewalks, and the smell of wet fir trees drifting through the air. I'd taken my usual afternoon walk along the Willamette River, watching gulls swoop low over the water while joggers passed me by without a second glance. Those walks were my refuge, a place where the weight of Melissa's constant remarks didn't reach me. By the time I returned home, the winter dusk was settling, and the glow of Christmas lights flickered through the frosted windows. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that things would be calm. I was wrong. The moment I stepped inside, I could tell from Melissa's stance in the living room that trouble was brewing. She stood rigid, arms crossed, her body framed by the decorated tree that sparkled with golden ornaments. The cheerful backdrop made the anger in her eyes stand out even sharper. "Richard," she began, her voice tight, "the heating bill came in today. It's outrageous. Do you even realize how much it costs when you run the thermostat the way you do?" I paused in the doorway, weary from my walk, but trying to keep my voice even. "Melissa, I don't touch the thermostat. My room is cold because it's drafty. I just use the small space heater at night. It barely runs for a few hours." Her tone sharpened, slicing through the house. "Don't play innocent with me. That bill didn't climb on its own. We can't keep covering your wastefulness. If you can't manage your share, then maybe it's time you consider other arrangements." The words hit harder than I expected. They were more than irritation about money. They were an ultimatum, dressed up in holiday lights. I could feel the humiliation crawl up my neck, making my face hot. I opened my mouth to reply, but just then David walked in from work. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his eyes heavy. He glanced at Melissa, then at me, and quickly dropped his gaze to the floor. Melissa wasn't finished. "This isn't a nursing home, Richard. We have our own lives to manage. You either pay what's fair, or you move out." The air seemed to freeze. The only sound was the faint hum of Christmas carols playing from the kitchen speaker and the blinking rhythm of the lights on the tree. For a moment, time slowed. I looked at David, silently begging for him to intervene, to say something, anything that might soften the blow. But he stood there, silent, the way he always did when Melissa spoke with finality. His silence was more painful than her words. I felt my throat tighten. "After everything," I managed quietly, though the words trembled in my chest. But Melissa had already turned away, brushing invisible dust off the mantel, as if the matter were settled. David muttered something about discussing it later, but the damage had been done. That night, I retreated to the back bedroom, my so-called space in a house that was legally mine. I closed the door and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. The space heater hummed in the corner, its glow faint against the peeling wallpaper. On the nightstand, Elaine's photograph stared back at me. Her smile, warm, reassuring, was a stark contrast to the bitterness of the evening. I reached out and touched the frame, remembering the Christmases we used to share. Real pine trees, the smell of fresh cookies, the laughter of children. None of it had been about money or power. It had been about love. Now, love was absent. In its place were accusations, ultimatums, and silence. I felt humiliation sink deep into my bones, the kind that lingers long after words are spoken. Yet beneath that humiliation, something else stirred, a slow, steady burn. Melissa thought she had me cornered, that her threats could strip me of dignity. What she didn't know was that every word she shouted had pushed me closer to revealing the truth. I leaned back in the chair by the window and listened to the rain tapping softly against the glass. My wife's voice echoed in memory. "Richard, patience is strength." I had been patient long enough. Something inside me hardened that night. Their ultimatum had lit a fuse, and though they didn't know it yet, the fire would change everything. By the time the house fell quiet, I understood something clearly. I would not allow myself to be treated as a burden in the very home I built, in the very space my money had bought and maintained. Melissa's scream, "Pay the rent or get out," was more than an insult. It was the spark of her undoing. If you're still watching and felt the weight of that first painful confrontation, leave number 3 below. Next, in chapter 4, you'll see how every attempt to fix things only makes the fire spread wider. The morning after Melissa's outburst, the house felt like a stage where every actor had forgotten their lines. Christmas lights blinked in the corners, but their glow seemed hollow, mocking rather than merry. I came down to breakfast with a tightness in my chest, bracing myself for more words like the night before. Instead, I found silence sharper than any argument. David sat hunched over his phone, scrolling through emails or perhaps pretending to. He stirred his coffee without drinking it, as though the act of motion gave him a shield. Melissa moved briskly about the kitchen, the scrape of pans and the slam of cabinet doors louder than usual. Her face betrayed nothing, yet every clipped gesture told me she considered the matter of my living arrangement already decided. I cleared my throat and tried to speak in a tone that sounded reasonable, even conciliatory. "I understand what you said last night. The bills must feel overwhelming. I'll look into cutting back where I can. Maybe I could add a little more to the monthly transfer. Not much, but something." Melissa didn't even pause in her movements. She poured orange juice into a glass, set it in front of David, and replied without looking at me. "It's not about pennies, Richard. It's about fairness. Everyone has to pull their weight." Her words landed heavy, like a gavel on a judge's bench. David finally looked up, his eyes flicking between us. He offered the kind of compromise that carries no conviction. "Maybe we can figure something out after the holidays. Let's just try to keep the peace for now." I nodded, though inside his lack of defense cut deeper than Melissa's sharpness. My son, the boy I'd once taught to ride a bike, now too weary or too unwilling to stand beside me. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of Melissa rinsing plates under hot water. That afternoon, I sought refuge in the public library. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper, a comforting scent that reminded me of the years Elaine and I had spent reading side by side on quiet evenings. I pretended to browse through novels, but my hands drifted toward the local newspapers and the real estate listings. Page after page, I studied numbers that startled me. Rents in Portland had doubled in the past decade. Houses in our neighborhood sold in days, often above asking price. At first, I scanned the listings with resignation. What would it cost for a man my age to rent a one-bedroom? But then, another thought took root. What would this house fetch if placed on the market? I traced the columns with my finger, calculating quietly. The Browns down the street had sold theirs for nearly $900,000. Ours was bigger, with better views. The figure lodged itself in my mind like a seed waiting for rain. That evening, I made another attempt to soothe things. Over dinner, I said gently, "I'll be mindful about the heater. Even if my room is cold, I can manage with extra blankets." I wanted her to hear reason, to see that I was trying. Melissa set down her fork with deliberate care, then met my gaze with eyes that gave nothing away. "We'll see," she said coolly, "but words don't pay bills." The meal went on in strained silence, every clink of silverware echoing like a reminder of where I stood, or rather, where I no longer stood. Each effort I made to compromise seemed to confirm Melissa's belief that I was a liability. I realized that appeasement was a losing game. Later, in my room, I sat by the small space heater and looked at Elaine's picture on the nightstand. Her smile radiated warmth that this house now lacked. I remembered her telling me once, "Richard, people reveal themselves when money enters the room. Listen, and you'll hear who they truly are." She had been right. I thought back over the last weeks, the sharp remarks about lights left on, the constant tally of expenses, the way Melissa's voice dripped with disdain when she spoke of me to the neighbors. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, about framing me as a dependent, rather than the man who had built his own life through hard work and patience. I leaned back in my chair, the faint hum of the heater in my ears, and for the first time in years, I considered something I had long kept locked away. Maybe it was time to stop playing the role Melissa had written for me. Maybe it was time to remind them that the roof over their heads had been mine all along. If you're still watching and realizing how desperate measures can backfire, type number 4 in the comments. Now, let's move on to Chapter 5, where everything is about to erupt. Christmas Eve had always carried a kind of magic for me, even in the years after Elaine passed. The smell of roasted turkey, the twinkle of lights, the faint sound of carols drifting from the radio. It all stirred memories of family warmth that once seemed unbreakable. But that night, as I sat in David and Melissa's living room, the magic felt hollow. Every ornament, every carefully arranged garland seemed like a mask hiding the truth beneath. Relatives filled the house. David's cousins and a few neighbors gathered, glasses of wine in hand, voices carrying over the hum of holiday cheer. The laughter seemed genuine, but I felt like an outsider perched at the edge of the couch, nodding politely when spoken to, but never truly part of the circle. Melissa floated from one guest to another, her smile bright but brittle, her eyes occasionally flicking toward me with a sharpness I recognized all too well. The evening began to unravel during dinner. The table was crowded with dishes, Melissa's pride on display: turkey golden brown, mashed potatoes whipped smooth, cranberry sauce shaped like it had come from a can but plated carefully. Conversations bounced across the table: work stories, vacation plans, children's grades. For a while, I managed to blend into the background. Then Melissa, her cheeks flushed with wine, decided to steer the conversation. "It's not easy keeping a big house like this afloat," she said, her tone light but her gaze pointed. "The bills keep piling up, and it feels like the costs only grow." A cousin chuckled sympathetically, murmuring about rising utility prices, but Melissa wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her glass of wine, and added, "Especially with extra people in the house who don't exactly contribute their fair share." Her eyes slid toward me like a knife. The air shifted. Forks paused mid-air. The cousin who had chuckled now stared into his plate. David cleared his throat, but no words followed. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I tried to steady my voice. "I've done what I can," I said quietly. "I pay what you ask each month." Melissa's smile was sharp as glass. "Oh, Richard, don't act like it's a gift. It doesn't even cover half the expenses. Heat, groceries, upkeep, it all adds up. Pay the rent or get out. That's the truth of it." Her words rang out louder than the carols still playing faintly from the kitchen speaker. Gasps rippled around the table. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others kept their eyes fixed firmly on their plates, unwilling to get caught in the crossfire. David rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand. "Melissa," he began, but his voice faltered and he fell silent. In that moment, something inside me snapped. For years I had swallowed the slights, endured the jabs, told myself patience was strength, but sitting there, humiliated in front of family and strangers alike, I felt the weight of those years ignite into something else: resolve. I rose from my chair slowly, my hands trembling not with weakness but with fury kept too long in check. The room fell silent. Melissa's smirk faltered for the first time as I met her gaze directly. "Enough," I said, my voice low but clear. "I've endured enough." The words hung heavy in the air. I could see surprise ripple across faces, hear the faint clink of a fork dropped onto a plate. No one knew what truth I was holding back, what secret I was ready to unleash. I looked at David, my son, my flesh and blood, hoping to see even a flicker of defense, of loyalty. But he only lowered his eyes, retreating into silence. That, more than Melissa's venom, cut me deepest. I sat back down slowly, feeling the tremor in my bones, but inside me something had shifted permanently. The humiliation I felt was not weakness, it was the final push I needed. Their ultimatum, their public shaming, had ignited a chain of events they couldn't begin to imagine. The Christmas Eve that was supposed to bind family together had instead torn us apart. The conflict had erupted like a storm, and I knew with certainty there would be no going back. The morning after Christmas felt strangely hollow, as if the holiday had been scrubbed of all meaning. Wrapping paper still littered the living room, the tree still blinked with strings of colored lights, yet none of it carried warmth. Instead, silence hung over the house like fog. Melissa moved briskly from room to room, her lips pressed into a thin line. David lingered in the garage longer than usual, pretending to tinker with tools so he wouldn't have to face me. I stayed in my room most of the day, staring at Elaine's photograph. Her smile, frozen in that old frame, reminded me of the woman who had always been my compass. I asked her silently what I should do. Part of me longed to keep the peace, to give Melissa what she wanted, and swallow my pride for the sake of family. But each time I replayed her words, pay the rent or get out, the humiliation stung sharper. It wasn't just an argument, it was a verdict. On the third morning, unable to endure the suffocating quiet, I put on my old coat and walked downtown. Portland's streets glistened from a steady drizzle, the scent of wet pavement mingling with roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. Holiday lights still dangled from lampposts, but to me, they looked like fading sparks of joy that no longer belonged to my life. I ducked into a small cafe I'd visited once before, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window. The place buzzed with people carrying shopping bags, couples laughing, families herding children in from the rain. I envied them, the ease with which they seemed to belong to one another. From my pocket, I drew out a business card. It was slightly bent at the corner, a relic from months ago when I'd chatted briefly with a realtor outside a neighborhood open house. I remembered him telling me prices in our area were soaring, that homes were being snatched up within days. At the time, I had tucked the card away, dismissing the notion. But now, turning it over in my fingers, it felt heavier than paper. It felt like a key. I set the card on the table and stared at it while sipping my coffee. A choice loomed larger with each passing second. Did I continue this charade, playing the role of a dependent old man under Melissa's roof, surrendering my dignity in exchange for a brittle semblance of family? Or did I take back what had always been mine, reveal the truth, and let the consequences fall where they may? The thought of confrontation chilled me. I knew once I pulled the curtain back, nothing could be repaired. Melissa would rage, David would retreat, and whatever bond remained between us might shatter completely. Yet the alternative, living each day with the shame of silence, seemed even worse. I left the cafe, the card tucked securely in my coat pocket, and wandered further through the city. Rain drummed steadily on my shoulders, but I barely felt it. My thoughts churned, shifting between memories of Elaine's kindness and the bitterness of Melissa's voice. I remembered Elaine's words from years ago. "Richard, money can twist people, but it can also reveal them. Be careful who you let see it." She had been right. By hiding the truth, I had kept the mask intact. But Melissa's cruelty had already revealed who she truly was, and David's silence had shown me who he had become. That night, I lay awake in the dark, the hum of the space heater filling the silence. My decision settled over me with the weight of inevitability. I would no longer endure humiliation in silence. The next steps would not be easy, and the fallout would be harsh, but I could not go on this way. Melissa and David thought they held all the cards, that I was trapped by age, by dependency, by fear. But the truth was, the deck had been mine all along. Soon they would learn it. For the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of something I hadn't known I missed: freedom. If you're still here and feeling the tension of the impossible choice, comment number 5 below. Now, let's uncover what happens when the decision is finally made. The days following Christmas unfolded like the slow descent of winter fog, thick, heavy, and suffocating. The house no longer felt like a home, but like a waiting room for a verdict I already knew was coming. Melissa's presence loomed in every corner. She moved about briskly, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary, her voice clipped and businesslike. The warmth of the holidays had vanished entirely, replaced by the chill of silent hostility. David, for his part, tried to bury himself in work. He spent long evenings at the dining table with spreadsheets and files scattered in front of him. though I doubted his mind was truly on the numbers. He avoided my eyes, as if looking at me would force him to confront the choice he had already made by saying nothing that night. His silence was as loud as Melissa's words had been, and perhaps more painful. Meals became rituals of endurance. We sat around the table, the clink of forks on plates louder than any conversation. Melissa would ask David about work, or Avery about her studies, her voice smooth but edged, making sure I was excluded. If I tried to contribute, a small remark about the weather or the news, she responded with polite dismissal, quickly steering the conversation away. It was clear I was no longer welcome, not just in their home, but in their lives. It was Avery who noticed first. She had always been more perceptive than the others, her youthful eyes sharper in ways they didn't realize. One evening, as Melissa and David argued softly in the kitchen about bills, Avery slipped into my room. She perched on the edge of the chair by my desk, her hands twisting nervously. "Grandpa," she whispered, "are you okay?" Her words nearly undid me. I wanted to tell her everything. The years of sacrifice, the secret I had carried, the storm about to break, but I couldn't drag her into the mess her parents had created. I forced a smile, though it felt thin. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't you worry." But she wasn't fooled. She studied my face for a long moment, then reached out to squeeze my hand. That simple gesture, more genuine than anything I'd felt in years under that roof, gave me strength. For her sake, I resolved, I would not waver in what I had chosen to do. At night, when the house fell silent, I began to prepare quietly. From the closet, I pulled down old boxes I had kept tucked away. Elaine's photographs, worn at the edges but still glowing with her smile, went into a padded envelope. My journals, where I had written of long shifts at the plant, of birthdays and family milestones, of grief after her passing, all were stacked carefully. A few keepsakes, a pocket watch my father had given me, and the letter Elaine had written me during our first year of marriage, found their place in a small box. Each item I packed felt like both a farewell and a promise. Farewell to the life I had endured here, and a promise that the next chapter, however lonely, would be on my terms. Melissa, I think, sensed what I was doing, even if she didn't confront me outright. She walked past my room more often than before, her footsteps pausing briefly at the door before moving on. Once I caught her eye as I closed a drawer, and her lips tightened into a line, but she said nothing. Perhaps she thought she had won, that her ultimatum had forced me into submission. She didn't yet understand that the decision I had made was far greater than simply leaving. David remained a ghost in his own house. When we crossed paths, he muttered a greeting or asked if I needed anything, but his words were hollow, his eyes elsewhere. I realized then that I had lost him long ago, not to Melissa, but to the lure of convenience, of avoiding conflict, of choosing peace at any cost. That was his weakness, and it was one I could no longer shoulder. The atmosphere in the house was unbearable, yet beneath it all, I felt an odd sense of clarity. I had already stepped away from this life, even if my feet still walked its halls. The moment Melissa spat those words at me, the old ties had snapped. Now, I was simply gathering the last pieces of myself before walking out the door. I knew the consequences would be severe. Once the truth emerged, Melissa's rage would scorch everything in its path, and David's disappointment would sting. Avery would be caught in the middle, torn between love for me and loyalty to her parents. But the course was set. The aftermath of that Christmas was not an end, but the beginning of something inevitable. The house had already ceased to be mine in spirit. Soon, it would cease to be theirs in truth. The nights had grown restless, not from age or illness, but from the steady drum of thoughts that refused to quiet. Each time I folded a shirt or tucked a photograph into a box, it felt like placing a stone on the scales of change. Melissa's ultimatum had forced me to see the truth. Remaining under her roof, pretending gratitude for humiliation, was not survival. It was surrender. I could not surrender, not after a lifetime of hard work, sacrifice, and the dignity Elaine had always believed I carried. So, I began to slip out during the day, my absences explained away as errands. Portland in late December carried its own beauty, rain slicking the streets, neon signs glowing against gray skies. the smell of roasted coffee drifting from open cafe doors. I walked through neighborhoods I hadn't visited in years, scanning for the bright red "for sale" and "for rent" signs that dotted lawns. Each one whispered possibility, a different kind of life waiting to be lived. One drizzly afternoon, I stopped outside a modest real estate office, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. I hesitated at the glass door, but something inside urged me forward. The same realtor whose business card I had carried for months greeted me warmly. He remembered our brief exchange outside that open house and spoke now with more detail, about property values soaring, about buyers lining up with cash in hand, about homes selling in days rather than months. I listened carefully, nodding, while he flipped through listings and market reports. Each word confirmed what I already knew. I was sitting on leverage I hadn't used, control I had forgotten I possessed. Melissa thought she had me cornered, but in truth she had been living in my shadow all along, unaware of the walls holding her up. Yet, as I left the office, the drizzle soaking my coat, I realized my motive wasn't only revenge, it was Avery. I pictured her earnest face when she whispered, "Grandpa, are you okay?" She didn't deserve to watch her family unravel into bitterness and blame. If I chose my path with care, perhaps I could shield her from the ugliest truths while still breaking free from the chains her mother had fastened around me. Walking back through downtown, the city felt different, alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. Couples huddled under umbrellas, children pressed their noses against toy store windows, baristas laughed with regulars at crowded counters. It was the sound of people living, not merely existing. For too long, I had let myself shrink into the corner of a house where I paid for the right to be insulted. No more. At home that evening, I sat by the window in my room, listening to the faint hum of the heater. Melissa clattered pots in the kitchen, David muttered into his phone, but their voices barely touched me. I had something stronger than their disdain: clarity. The humiliation of Melissa's command, "Pay the rent or get out," no longer echoed as pain but as fuel. It had lit a fire that could not be extinguished. I picked up the realtor's card again, tracing the letters of his name with my thumb. It was no longer just paper, it was a key, and I was ready to use it. Soon, they would learn the truth, not in anger shouted across the dinner table, but in the unmistakable finality of a signed contract. For years, I had played a part. The dependent old man, the tolerated burden. That mask had grown heavy, almost convincing even to myself. But as I looked at the small boxes stacked neatly in the corner of my room, I felt something I hadn't in a long while: anticipation. The way forward was no longer hidden. It stretched before me in the glow of Portland's wet streets and in the quiet strength of Elaine's memory. I would reclaim what was mine. I would step out of the shadows I had allowed to swallow me, and when the storm broke, I would face it standing tall, not bowed. The next chapter of my life would not be written under Melissa's roof. It would be written by my own hand, on my own terms, and no one, not Melissa, not David, not their disdain, could take that away. If you're still watching and finding hope in the aftermath of the storm, write number 6 in the comments. Now, let's move forward to see how healing and resolution start to take shape. The moment of truth arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet thud of an envelope slipped through the mail slot. I knew what it contained before Melissa even picked it up from the floor. Her shrill voice tore through the house, calling David into the kitchen. The sound of paper being ripped open followed, and then silence. Thick, heavy silence. I stayed in my room, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest, but not from fear. It was anticipation, the culmination of weeks, even years, of restraint. When Melissa finally appeared at my door, her face was a mixture of rage and disbelief. "What is this?" she demanded, waving the letter in my face. "Eviction? Sale? 30 days to move? This has to be a mistake." I met her glare with calm. "It's no mistake. The house has been sold." Her mouth fell open before twisting into a sneer. "Sold? You mean the landlord sold it? You knew about this? Why didn't you tell us?" David entered then, his brow furrowed, holding the letter with trembling hands. "Melissa's right. This makes no sense. We've been paying rent on time. How could the owner just... He stopped as his eyes flicked to me, suspicion dawning. Unless... Yes, I said, my voice steady. The owner had every right to sell. Because the owner was me all along. The air left the room as if someone had opened a vacuum. Melissa's face drained of color. David staggered back, clutching the counter for support. You, he whispered, all these years, you let us believe. I let you believe what you wanted to believe. I interrupted, that I was dependent, that I needed your roof over my head. But the truth is, I bought this house decades ago, with my own money. And every rent payment you demanded from me went right back into my own accounts. I paid it to protect the secret, to keep the peace. But your greed, Melissa, your words on Christmas Eve, ended that peace. Melissa's eyes blazed. So, you lied to us? You tricked us? And now you're throwing your own family out on the street? No, I said firmly. I sold my property, which I have every right to do. You have 30 days to find another place, plenty of time given your income and resources. That's not the street. That's reality. David stepped forward then, his voice low, pleading rather than angry. Dad, we could have worked something out. You didn't have to blindside us like this. I shook my head slowly. I gave you chance after chance. I endured your disdain, Melissa's contempt, your silence. But when your wife told me to pay rent or get out, she gave me my choice. And I chose. For a moment, the kitchen was filled only with Melissa's ragged breathing. Then she exploded, shouting about betrayal, about how I would die alone, about how Avery would hate me when she learned the truth. I didn't flinch. The storm no longer reached me. Later that night, Avery knocked gently on my door. Her eyes were wide, her voice trembling. Grandpa, is it true? You owned the house all along? I nodded. Yes, sweetheart. I bought it years ago, after your grandmother passed. I never told anyone because I knew what would happen if I did. She sat beside me, quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, Mom says you did this to punish her. To punish all of us. I sighed, placing a hand over hers. I did it to reclaim my life. I'm tired of being treated like a burden. Sometimes the hardest lesson is the one people don't want to hear. She leaned into me then, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. She didn't judge me, not yet. She only held on, and that was enough. When the closing day arrived, I signed the final papers with a steady hand. The realtor congratulated me, his voice cheerful, but all I felt was release. The house, once a symbol of family, had become a cage of resentment. Letting it go meant letting go of the illusion that had bound me for too long. Melissa and David scrambled to find another place, their pride in tatters, their certainty shaken. I watched from a distance, not with triumph, but with a quiet understanding. This was the cost of truth. For me, the outcome wasn't victory, but freedom. I had walked through fire and come out whole. The house was gone, but dignity remained, and that I realized was worth more than walls or roofs or even blood. When the dust finally settled, I sat in the stillness of my new home, surrounded not by tension and bitterness, but by peace. The air was different here. No one hovered outside my door, counting the minutes I spent with the light on or reminding me of how much my presence cost them. The silence was not heavy with judgment. It was freedom, pure and unburdened. The house I had sold no longer belonged to me, nor to Melissa and David, who now scrambled to adjust to their new reality. Their bitterness was palpable even from a distance. They painted me as a villain, a man who betrayed his own family. Yet deep down, I knew their outrage was not about betrayal. It was about losing the control they had so carefully wrapped around me. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my silence for surrender. They were wrong. Weston, too, entered the fray, calling me with accusations laced with self-interest. His words carried anger, but beneath it I could hear the same thing I had heard from him my entire life: calculation. He wanted to know what remained, whether he could still pry something from the wreckage. It pained me, but it no longer surprised me. My children had grown into people I barely recognized, consumed by entitlement, blind to gratitude. Only Avery remained untouched by the greed that had poisoned the others. She came to visit often, sometimes with books tucked under her arm, sometimes with nothing but her smile. She didn't ask for money, didn't demand explanations. She simply sat with me, listening, laughing, reminding me that love untainted by calculation still existed. When she leaned against my shoulder and told me about her dreams of becoming a journalist, I felt hope that at least one branch of this family tree had grown straight and strong. I thought often of Elaine during those quiet evenings. Her photograph sat on the mantel, her eyes as piercing as the day we met. She had always valued honesty, had always told me secrets rot a family from within. I could almost hear her scolding me for hiding the truth for so long. But then I imagined her seeing Melissa's cold commands, David's evasive justifications, Weston's endless pleas for money. She would have understood why I chose silence, why I chose, in the end, to reveal everything in a single decisive act. What I had learned was simple, though it had taken me a lifetime to grasp. Family ties are not chains. They are threads, fragile and precious, meant to bind us with care, not to strangle with demands. When those threads turn into ropes, cutting them is not cruelty, it is survival. The lesson was never about property or wealth. It was about boundaries, about dignity, about the right of an old man to live the remainder of his days free from manipulation. Too many times I had swallowed my pride for the sake of keeping peace. Too many times I had allowed myself to be painted as a burden when I was the very one holding the foundation together. The house was just brick and wood. The true prison had been the lie that I needed their permission to exist. On a bright spring morning, Avery and I sat on the porch of my new home. The garden was beginning to bloom, tulips pushing their way through the soil. She sipped tea while I cradled a mug of coffee, the sun warming our faces. She told me she was applying for an internship at a local newspaper, her eyes alight with determination. "You'll do well," I told her. "You see the world clearly. That's a rare gift." She smiled, but then her expression grew serious. "Do you ever regret it, Grandpa? Selling the house, telling them the truth?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Regret? Number. Sadness, maybe. It hurts to admit my own children loved the security I gave them more than they loved me. But I don't regret choosing freedom. I don't regret showing them I still had a voice. She nodded, as if she understood more than her years should allow. In that moment, I realized Elaine's legacy lived on, not in the children who squandered it, but in the granddaughter who cherished it. Revenge may have sparked the fire, but it wasn't anger that kept me alive. It was release. The freedom to wake each morning without feeling like an intruder. The freedom to drink my coffee without listening for footsteps of disapproval. The freedom to know that, even in my final years, I had the courage to draw a line and stand by it. And that, I realized, was the truest inheritance I could pass on to Avery. The lesson that dignity is worth more than wealth, that freedom is worth more than comfort, and that love without respect is no love at all. Life often teaches us that the most difficult battles are not fought in boardrooms or on battlefields, but within the walls of our own homes and inside the silence of our own hearts. Sometimes, what looks like revenge from the outside is really a fight for dignity on the inside. There comes a moment in every life when silence becomes heavier than truth, when compromise feels like surrender, and when the price of staying quiet outweighs the cost of speaking up. The final chapters of this journey remind us that freedom is not found in wealth or possessions, but in the courage to protect one's self-respect. Houses can be sold, relationships can fracture, fortunes can come and go, but the ability to draw boundaries, to say enough, and to walk away with head held high, that is something that no betrayal can take away. It is in the letting go that we often rediscover ourselves. We learn that love without respect is hollow, that family without trust is fragile, and that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. It sometimes means choosing peace for oneself. These truths are not easy to accept, especially when they come at the price of separation or solitude. but they carry a liberating power. When we realize we are not prisoners of circumstance, but authors of our own lives, we unlock a kind of freedom that is priceless. And so the story closes not with bitterness, but with clarity. The lesson is not about vengeance, but about reclaiming one's right to live authentically. It is a reminder that, even in the later years of life, it is never too late to demand respect, to protect dignity, and to choose freedom over oppression. What matters in the end is not how others judge us, but how at peace we feel when we look into our own reflection. Now, I'd like to turn this reflection over to you, the viewers and readers who have journeyed through this story with me. Stories like this are powerful not only because they entertain, but because they resonate. They remind us of our own experiences, our own crossroads, and the decisions we have made, or wish we had made. Have you ever faced a moment when speaking up cost you comfort, but gave you freedom? Have you had to walk away from those you love in order to preserve your own dignity? Or perhaps you've stood on the other side, realizing too late that you had taken someone's presence, patience, or sacrifice for granted. These are questions that dig deep, and sharing your thoughts could help not only yourself, but others who may be quietly struggling with similar challenges. If this story moved you, I invite you to leave a comment below. Share your reflections, your experiences, or even your questions. Our community is built on the exchange of wisdom, and your voice might be the one that reaches someone at just the right moment. And if you found value here, whether in the lessons, the emotions, or the reminder that respect and freedom are worth fighting for, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you'll stay connected to more stories that dive deep into the complexities of family, relationships, betrayal, healing, and the quiet victories that often go unnoticed. Each subscription is not just a number, but a reminder that these conversations matter, that the lessons we share together are worth carrying forward. Don't forget to hit the notification bell as well, so you'll never miss the next story that might speak directly to your own life. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes the right words, the right story, arrive just when we need them most. Finally, I want to thank you for giving your time, your attention, and your open heart to this journey. Without you, these stories would simply be words floating in the air. With you, they become connections, shared reflections, and reminders that no one walks alone in their struggles. Together, we create a space where dignity, respect, and resilience are celebrated. So, as we close this chapter, remember, freedom begins where fear ends, and dignity begins where silence breaks. Protect it, cherish it, and never forget, you have the right to live on your own terms. Thank you for being here. I look forward to hearing your thoughts below and to seeing you again in the next story. Until then, take care of yourself, value your worth, and always choose respect over compromise. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.